Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into something pretty cool today, ergonomics. I'll be honest, I used to think it was just about, like, fancy office chairs for people with back problems.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
But getting ready for this deep dive, I realized is way more than that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's about literally everything we use, from our phones to cars to even something as simple as a vegetable peeler.
It really is everywhere.
We're going off an excerpt from an ergonomics textbook, which is pretty dense, I'm not going to lie. But hopefully we can break it down and find some interesting takeaways. What do you say? Ready to jump in?
Absolutely, let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first, can we just define what ergonomics actually is for those of us who, aren't exactly experts?
Sure. In the simplest terms, ergonomics is the science of designing and arranging things people use so that the interaction between people and those things is, well, as good as possible.
Okay, so it's not just about comfort then.
Right? Comfort is definitely a big part of it. But it's also about safety, efficiency, and making sure things are easy to use and understand.
Got it. So like a well-designed doorknob would be considered ergonomic.
Exactly. If it's easy to grasp, turn, and doesn't cause any strain or discomfort, that's good ergonomics in action.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do designers actually figure this stuff out? I mean, what works for one person might not work for another, right?
You're absolutely right. There's no one-size-fits-all solution in ergonomics, and that's where things get really interesting. Designers use what's called anthropometric data.
Anthropo what now?
Anthropometric data. Basically, it's measurements of the human body, like height, weight, limb length, grip strength, all sorts of things.
So they're like taking all these measurements and using them to design products that fit like the average person, sort of. But they don't just look at averages. They use percentile ranges to make sure they're accommodating a wide variety of body types. For example, a car designer might design the driver's seat to fit someone from the 5th percentile all the way up to the 95th percentile in height.
Okay, I see. So they're thinking about a whole spectrum of people, not just like the average Joe. So to
Exactly.
get this straight, they're not just guessing or going off their own intuition when designing something. They're using actual hard data.
Precisely. That's what makes ergonomics a science.
But, even with all this data, isn't there still some subjectivity involved? Like, I might prefer a softer chair, while someone else might prefer something firmer.
That's a great point, and you're absolutely right. There will always be individual preferences, and good designers try to account for that as much as possible.
So how do they do that?
Well, some level of adjustability is often built into the design.
Right. Like those office chairs with all the levers and knobs.
Hmm.
Exactly. Think about adjustable seats in cars, or the way you can customize the height of your office chair. And they also rely heavily on user feedback.
So it's not just about data, it's about how people actually experience the product in the real world.
Right. Designers gather feedback from real people to see how their products are being used, and they make adjustments based on that feedback.
So it's like a constant back and forth between data and real world testing.
It is. It's a process of continual improvement.
So it's like science, but with like a human touch.
Yeah, I like that. Science with a human touch. That's a great way to put it.
I'm starting to see why this stuff is so fascinating, but I think we need to get into some specific examples.
I agree. Let's dive into some real-world applications.
Okay, so what are some products that really benefit from good ergonomic design? What comes to mind?
Well, the classic example, and one we've already touched upon, is office chairs. Spending hours sitting at a desk can really take a toll on your body if the chair isn't designed properly.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. My back knows all about bad chairs.
So good ergonomic office chairs have things like adjustable height, lumbar support, and even armrests that can be moved up and down.
Ah.
All of these features help you maintain good posture and reduce strain on your back, neck, and wrists.
So it's not just about being comfy, it's about preventing actual pain and health problems.
Exactly.
And it's not just office stuff, right? Like what about tools? I imagine ergonomics plays a big role in their design as well.
Absolutely. Think about a hammer, for instance.
Okay, yeah.
The shape and material of the handle can significantly impact how comfortable and efficient it is to use. A good ergonomic hammer will have a handle that's shaped to fit the contours of your hand, and it might have a textured grip to prevent it from slipping. These small details can make a big difference in how much force you need to exert and how much strain you put on your wrist.
See, I never really thought about it like that.
But those little things can really add up.
Yeah, it's like when you use a well-designed tool, it just feels right.
Exactly. It's intuitive and comfortable, and it makes the task easier. And the same principles apply to a wide range of tools, from screwdrivers and wrenches to gardening shears and power drills.
So what we're saying is good ergonomic design can help reduce fatigue, prevent injuries, and make the whole experience of using a tool much more enjoyable.
Exactly. And that's true for so many products beyond just tools. Think about sports equipment. A tennis racket that's too heavy or a bicycle seat that's the wrong height can affect your performance and even lead to injuries. Designers use anthropometric data to create equipment that's tailored to the specific demands of the sport and the size and build of the athlete.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely relate to that. Speaking of comfort, does this apply to things like clothing too?
It absolutely does.
Oh, really?
Think about shoes. A well-designed shoe will provide support and cushioning for your feet, reducing the impact on your joints. The shape and fit of the shoe can also affect your gait and balance.
Wow. Shoes. Who knew?
And then, of course, there's athletic wear. Compression garments, for example, are designed to improve blood flow and reduce muscle fatigue during exercise. It's like a second skin that helps your body perform at its best.
So it's not just about, like, looking good. There's actually some serious science behind it.
Exactly.
It's amazing how pervasive ergonomics really is.
Isn't it?
It's in everything.
It truly is everywhere we look. It's about making our interactions with the world around us more comfortable, efficient, and even enjoyable.
That's a great way to put it. But I have to ask, is there a downside to all this focus on ergonomics?
Oh, that's a great question.
Does it sometimes lead to products that are, like, overly complicated or crazy expensive? I mean, I've seen some ergonomic gadgets that seem a bit over the top.
You're right to point that out. It's a valid concern. Sometimes the pursuit of ergonomic perfection can lead to designs that are unnecessarily complex or costly. And it's true that some companies might use the ergonomic label as a marketing tactic to justify higher prices.
Ah, that's kind of sneaky. So how do we tell the difference between, like, genuine ergonomic design and just, marketing hype?
That's a great question. I think the key is to do your research
Okay, good advice.
and be a bit skeptical. Don't just assume that something is better because it has the word ergonomics slapped on the label. Look for products that are backed by scientific evidence and that have been designed and tested with real users in mind.
So it's all about being an informed consumer, doing your homework, and not just falling for fancy buzzwords.
Exactly. You can also look for certifications from reputable organizations that specialize in ergonomics. These certifications can give you some assurance that the product has been designed and tested to meet certain standards.
This is so helpful. I feel like I'm getting a crash course in ergonomics here.
I'm glad to hear it.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
It really is.
Now, the source material also mentions something called cognitive ergonomics.
Ah, yes.
What exactly is that?
That's a great transition.
Oh, is it?
Cognitive ergonomics is all about the mental side of design. It's about minimizing cognitive load, basically how much mental effort it takes to use something, and making sure information is presented in a way that's easy for our brains to process.
So it's not just about how things feel physically, but also about how we think about them.
You got it.
I'm really intrigued by this whole cognitive ergonomics thing. It sounds like it could apply to a vast range of things beyond just physical products.
You're absolutely right. Think about the design of websites, apps, even road signs. They all need to be designed in a way that minimizes mental effort and makes them easy to understand.
Can you give us some specific examples?
Let's take a website, for instance. Imagine you're trying to find some information. A well-designed website will have a clear layout, intuitive navigation, and concise text that's easy to scan and understand. They might use visual cues like headings, bullet points, and images to break up the information and make it more digestible.
That makes a lot of sense. I know I get frustrated when I'm on a website that's cluttered and difficult to navigate. I end up feeling overwhelmed and just give up.
Exactly, and that's a classic example of cognitive overload. When we're presented with too much information or a confusing layout, our brains have to work harder to process it all. That can lead to fatigue, frustration, and even errors.
So good cognitive ergonomics is all about making things easier on our brains, like mental decluttering, but for websites and apps.
I like that analogy. And it's not just about digital interfaces. Think about a well-designed instruction manual for a new appliance. It should have clear diagrams, step-by-step instructions, and language that's easy to understand.
I'm realizing that I've definitely experienced the effects of good and bad cognitive ergonomics without even realizing it. Like a well-designed board game with clear rules and intuitive gameplay is so much more enjoyable than one that's overly complicated and confusing.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
A good game designer considers the cognitive load of the players and tries to minimize it so they can focus on having fun.
So it's not just about making things pretty, it's about making them easy to understand and use both physically and mentally.
Exactly. And that's what makes ergonomics so fascinating. It's a truly interdisciplinary field that draws from psychology, physiology, engineering, and design. It's all about creating a world that's better suited to our human needs and capabilities.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about anthropometric data, physical ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics, and the importance of user feedback. But I'm still curious to hear more about how designers actually go about incorporating all of this into their work. Is it something they consciously think about from the very beginning, or is it more of an afterthought?
That's a great question. Ideally, ergonomics should be considered from the very beginning of the design process. It's much easier to incorporate ergonomic principles into a product from the ground up than it is to try to retrofit them later on.
That makes sense. It's like building a house. It's much easier to design in features like energy efficiency and accessibility from the start than it is to try to add them later on.
Exactly. And just like an architect might consult with structural engineers and electricians, a product designer might consult with ergonomists and human factors specialists to get expert input on how to create a product that's safe, comfortable, and easy to use.
So it's a collaborative process. That's great because it means that there are people whose entire job is to think about these things and make sure that products are designed with our well-being in mind.
Precisely. And the role of the ergonomist is becoming increasingly important as technology continues to evolve. We're interacting with more and more devices and systems in our daily lives, and it's crucial that these interactions are designed to be as seamless and enjoyable as possible.
Okay, this is all super insightful, but I'm curious, is there a downside to all this focus on ergonomics? Is it possible to go too far?
That's an interesting question. I think there's always a risk of over-engineering a product in the pursuit of perfect ergonomics. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one, and adding too many bells and whistles can actually make a product more complicated and difficult to use.
So it's a balancing act. You want to make things ergonomic, but you don't want to overdo it and end up with something that's overly complex or confusing.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to remember that ergonomics is not a one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person might not work for another, and it's important to allow for individual preferences and adjustments.
That makes sense. We're all different and we have different needs and preferences. But this has been a great overview of the key principles of ergonomics. I feel like I have a much better understanding of what it is and why it's so important.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And I think the most important takeaway is that ergonomics is all about making our interactions with the world around us more human-centered. It's about designing products and systems that are tailored to our physical and cognitive capabilities and that enhance our overall well-being.
I love that. It's a beautiful vision. So, any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Yes, actually. I think it's important to remember that ergonomics is an ongoing process. It's not just about designing a product and then forgetting about it. Products need to be tested and evaluated to make sure they're actually working as intended.
That makes sense. You could have the best design on paper, but if it doesn't actually work well in the real world, what's the point?
Right. And sometimes even well-designed products need to be adjusted or redesigned based on user feedback.
So they're constantly learning and improving. It's like a continuous feedback loop.
Exactly. It's a continuous process of refinement and improvement.
That's so cool. It's like ergonomics is always evolving.
It is. And that's one of the things that makes it such a dynamic and exciting field.
So we've talked about ergonomics in products, tools, even clothing. But what about the spaces we live and work in?
That's a great point. Ergonomics plays a huge role in the design of our built environment, too.
Like, what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, think about things like the layout of a room, the placement of furniture, the lighting, the acoustics. All of these factors can impact our comfort, productivity, and even our mood.
So it's not just about having a comfy chair, it's about the whole space working together.
Precisely. It's about creating an environment that supports our well-being and helps us to function at our best.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there any, like, easy things that people can do to make their own spaces more ergonomic?
Absolutely. There are tons of simple things you can do, like make sure your desk is at the right height so you're not hunching over your keyboard,
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. My neck is feeling that right now.
and make sure you have good lighting so you're not straining your eyes.
Okay, yeah, lighting is important. I've definitely noticed a difference when I have good lighting.
And take breaks to get up and move around. Sitting for long periods of time can be really hard on your body.
True. It's easy to get sucked into work and forget to move.
Even just a few minutes of stretching or walking around can make a big difference.
This is all great advice. I'm definitely going to be thinking more about my own workspace after this.
I hope so. And remember, ergonomics is all about finding what works best for you.
Okay, so there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another. It's all about finding what helps you to feel comfortable, supported, and able to do your best work.
I love that. It's all about empowering people to create spaces that work for them.
Exactly. And that's what I find so inspiring about ergonomics. It's a field that's all about putting people first.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring the world of ergonomics with you.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We hope you learned something new today. Be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.